Hi, my name is Saman Farid, and I beat the often path by making robots useful for the world.
All right, well, joining us right now here, everybody, is Saman Farid, the CEO and founder of Formic Technologies, a company at the forefront of revolutionizing automation and manufacturing with a passionate commitment to boosting productivity in U.S. industries. His company, Formic, specializes in offering cutting-edge robotic solutions that elegantly simplify automation. These versatile robots not only streamline the packing and palletizing processes, but also contribute to the production of a diverse range of products from delightful chocolate chip cookies to specialty chemicals. Saman's journey in the tech and robotics realm is marked by significant achievements, including founding Comet Labs, an AI-focused investment fund and incubator. He also ran the global investment fund at Baidu Ventures, focusing on AI, machine learning, and its effects on the way we work and live. His expertise and enthusiasm for technology have led him to invest in and guide over 25 businesses in robotics, AI, and technology. Beyond his professional endeavors, Saman is deeply invested in youth empowerment and actively supports technology education through local nonprofits. So I'm super jazzed about this conversation. So joining us right now is Saman Farid. I'm Ross Palmer, and this is Beat the Often Path. So needless to say, you've done quite a bit in your journey. I'm so honored to have you here. It's just a deeply, deeply humbling to sit and get a chance to talk with you about some of these topics that are affecting our world so much right now, the really hot button topics. You've been at this forever. So where should we jump in? Should we jump into the current venture and automation? Or you obviously have a very unique way of seeing the world. How do we get into your story?
No, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. You got a lot of wonderful guests on this podcast. I think obviously I'm most passionate right now about the thing I'm working on right now.
Of course.
I think it's all interrelated. I think
Absolutely.
it's always one of those things where you can't. I forgot who said it. I'm copying this from somewhere, but I can't remember who. But you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can kind of easily connect the dots when you're looking
Our
backward.
man Steve Jobs. Who
There,
else?
there we
We're
go.
in the
There we
Bay
go.
Area right now. That's probably on a statue somewhere near your house.
Yeah, very likely, very likely. But it feels like a lot of the things I did so far accumulated in kind of where I am and what I'm doing today. Even though at the time a lot of those things that I did, I was like, why the hell am I doing this? Or it doesn't really make sense, or
Yeah.
I don't see how this is ever going to contribute to kind of the things I want to do in the long run.
Yep.
And it's so wonderful to look back and see how each of those dots somehow connected.
And from my perspective, they connect in a very logical way. And that's one of the beauties of doing research. I mean, I knew something about you before I dug in, but then learning more, you find what appears to be a very logical pattern of discovery and of building things. And of course, your fascination with AI, automation, these are the issues of our time. And one of the interesting things that I saw, so, as a child, you developed a fascination with robotics, but you realized that this was the future. And this is a part that I find so fascinating about builders and entrepreneurs in general. And then you decided that it should be your mission to accelerate that change to what you perceived to be an inevitable future. So what is the impulse to accelerate a change that one already believes is, let's say, destined to happen anyways?
It just wasn't happening fast enough.
Okay.
I think when you imagine what the future could be like, when you imagine how the future of work would look, and then you go into all of these factories where we go often for my work now, and you see people spending 12 hours a day doing really really kind of backbreaking, painful, and rudimentary work. I think the inevitable conclusion is like humans can do so much more. There's so much potential, there's so much capacity and capability. And I remember vividly a few months ago, we have a customer that bottles shampoo and lotion and things like that, and you go on this line and there's 40 people standing in a row, just screwing the caps on
Yeah.
all day. And
Yeah.
they would do a few caps and they would shake their hand because it's so painful, and then they do a few more. And 30 people doing that all day every day. You just have to imagine that those people are capable of doing a much much more interesting work. I think when I see those kinds of scenarios and situations, and then on the other side, when you go and you see, you go to the store, you go to build something for your house, and you fix something, and you always think like this shouldn't cost this much, right?
Mm.
Like why are these things all so expensive? Why is life getting so expensive for everybody? The natural conclusion is like we can't make things effectively anymore.
Yeah.
and we can't make things for cheap enough that they become widely available. And so, because there's this shortage of resources, then all the resources accumulate in the hands of the few, the people who can afford it. And so, for the majority of humanity, there's still not definitely not the term abundance definitely doesn't apply, but even like sufficiency is
Yeah.
barely applicable, right? Like, and so so many people don't have enough, and it's for the simple reason that we just can't produce enough for cheap enough.
Mm.
And so that's a very kind of propelling mission for me, and something that we want to figure out how to solve.
That makes perfect sense. And what I love about this topic, and really what I wanted to talk with you about, is this dichotomy of potential futures. I think each one of us at this moment in time, maybe more so than in recent memory, we see two paths diverging. We see a utopian future where all of these amazing things happen, and we see a dystopian future where nobody can find a job and nobody has meaningful work and all of that, and AI takes our jobs. They took our jobs from South Park, if you ever watched that show.
They took our jobs. Yeah, they down. Took our jobs. They did.
And we also see a sort of dichotomy between things are getting more expensive and therefore we need to make things cheaper, but also I am earning less and my ability to earn money is going down. So how do you see that for the average person, and also for the people who think that maybe working in a factory is the only job that they could get, or who don't consider themselves to be highly skilled laborers?
Yeah, I think that that's easy. I hate to say it's easy, but
Yeah.
any evidence proves that it's easy,
Okay.
because we've put robots into 50 or 60 factories so far, and all not a single one of them has fired anybody because of putting robots in. What happens when and there's so much data and history to prove this, that when robots are put into a business and they become more productive and more profitable, uh, the owners of these businesses, the owners of these factories, the managers of these factories have 100 ideas for additional things that they would do. If you
Mm.
go to any business owner or any factory owner and you said, tomorrow, I can give you 1,000 extra people to work for, like, what would you do? Nobody would say, okay, I'd fire everybody that I have. Like, they would have a
Mm.
hundred more things that they would want to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so each of these businesses, once they get some automation, they free up some of the people from the most painful, difficult, dirty, dangerous tasks. Uh, they then put those people into other functions, right? And these businesses start to grow, and they're finally competitive and profitable, right? Like, I'm sure you know this, but American factories are globally very uncompetitive, right?
Mm.
And so the only products that are made in America are the products people are willing to pay a big premium for,
Yeah.
right? And
It's a
so
small list.
it's a very small list, yeah. And the way that we combat that is we have to make American factories competitive globally, and the only path there is much more labor. The typical factory that we work with, they have a 20 to 30% per month headcount turnover.
Mm.
Meaning,
Dang, I
they're
didn't know
hiring
that.
for each role 3 times a year,
Wow.
2 or 3 times a year, right? So
Because it's so backbreaking and so
it's
arduous.
backbreaking, it's painful, and because they're paying so little, like, there's much better jobs for folks, right? If you're going to get
Mm.
paid $15 or $20 an hour, Starbucks or Amazon warehouses or these other
Yeah.
places are generally much more attractive than working in these really dull, dirty, and dangerous factories. And so um, these business owners, right? Like, maybe I'll ask you a question. See, maybe the audience will have a different guess
Yeah.
too. But so there are 8,600 hours in a year. How many hours do you think the typical factory in America is running?
Oh, all right. 8,600 hours in a year. Um, I'm going to say 75% of that, whatever that amounts to. Let's say 6,000 hours.
Yeah, it's a good guess, but unfortunately, you're off by quite a lot. That's
Okay.
6,000 hours is usually the amount of time that they're idle.
Okay.
They run on average
Like,
about 2,000 hours per year.
so flipped.
Uh,
All right.
And so every factory, all of this machinery, the building, the air conditioners, the forklifts, the heavy machinery, everything sits idle 75% of the time. And it's not because it's not because they don't have orders to fulfill. It's not because they don't have raw materials. The only reason is because they don't have labor that can come and man those posts for 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And that's the thing that we're trying to remedy.
So I learned that today I have something in common with factories. We both spend the great majority of our time idle and unproductive. This is good to know. I'm going to reference that in my next in my next conversation. Okay, so obviously we're not talking about mega factories like the Coca-Colas and these giant fine-tuned machines pumping out millions and billions of things. We're talking about the small to medium businesses here. Is that the majority of the companies that are making up that statistic?
The statistic applies even to the larger companies in
Okay.
America. But yeah, I mean, we primarily work with medium size, small
Yeah.
to medium size. Although we do have some very large
Yeah.
companies as customers as well. The interesting thing is even some of these very very large companies, they may have 200 or 300 plants across the U.S. Each plant still operates kind of like a small business. They
Mm.
have their own P&L, they have
Yeah.
their own management, they have their own teams and engineers and operations folks. And while there may be a certain level of sophistication or familiarity with automation at the corporate level,
Yeah.
a lot of the individual plants are still, look like they've been exactly the same for the last 80 years. We went
Wow.
to a factory recently. One of our customers actually, they used to make parts for the Ford Model T.
Okay.
The guy who started that factory passed it down to his son, who passed it down to his son, who's now the
Cornelius J.
current
Ford. Yeah.
owner and operator.
Mm.
And when you walk into that plant, I swear, it's like you've been transported back 100 years.
Wow.
That everything in there is at least 80 to 100 years old. And that is a common situation in American manufacturing.
Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah. Well, one of the things that so I knew you'd have a more optimistic view. Of course, that's one common trait of all of the entrepreneurs that I interview. At least they all publicly claim to have an optimistic viewpoint. It seems to be a requirement for the job of being an entrepreneur, or at least a successful one, anyways. When you were running that fund back at Baidu, which is obviously a big deal, you were also investigating the impact of AI and machine learning, and I saw this on the ways that we work and live, which again ties directly in the Steve Jobs quote to what you're doing now. What did you discover in that? Did you discover that AI would primarily be an assistant or a tool that we would use? Did you discover things that made you cautious or scared or apprehensive about what rampant use of AI might mean?
Um, yeah, I think uh, AI is fundamentally not very different from the previous kind of technological revolutions that we've had
Yeah.
as a society. Right. I think the last most recent one was the internet. The one
Yep.
before that was microprocessors. The one before that, was debatable, but kind of industrial revolution is what I think of as one of the big ones.
Yeah.
Um, Automobiles. Right. There's all of these things. Even bicycles. Right. Each of these things at one time came around. Right, and were criticized as this is going to take away our humanity. This is going to take away our creativity. This is going
Mhm.
to take away jobs. Everybody's going to be sitting around twiddling their thumbs once this becomes commonplace. And you know uh, that's never happened, right? And I think AI is exactly the same in the sense that it is making us massively more productive as individuals, as
Yeah.
organizations, and I think that's in general, a net good for society. I think the big difference from AI with those previous technological revolutions is that there were revolutions that were focused around like physical improvement, right? Like they kind of, you can imagine, kind of made our muscles obsolete,
Yep.
in a sense, right? But
Hmm.
AI is maybe more intellectual than some of the previous ones. Um, but the internet and semiconductors and that were all all contributed in a similar way. I think AI really fundamentally is three things, right? Like one is it's gotten a lot better at perceiving the world,
Yeah.
and that comes from a massive improvement in the quality and quantity of sensors that are in the world, as well as things like the internet, which I think of almost as like as a sensor to AI. Right? It's collecting data and then it's feeding
Right.
it. And so AI is allowing us to make sense of all of that data in a much, much better way, in a way that a human couldn't. The next thing that AI does is make decisions, and it can make decisions also in a way that is a vastly higher order of magnitude than what people can do.
Mm.
Right? Like, let's say and I'm thinking in factory terms because I've been in factories, but like, let's say you're kind of operating the control room of a factory. Right? You can kind of look at the new information, and you can make a new decision every 30 minutes, 60 minutes, right? If you're really focused on it, based on new information, you can say, oh, actually, look, let's adjust the parameters in this way or that way. Right? AI can do that 35,000 times per second and
Yeah.
not break a sweat. Right? So we can take all of that decision making capability and drastically amplify it. And then the third thing is to act on those decisions, right? And AI is improving our ability to do that. And so each of those three things has drastically improved, and LLMs are a part of that,
Mm.
but fundamentally, again, no different than the kind of previous revolution. So I think I'm very, very optimistic by
Mm.
what it brings. I think there's a lot of people who talk about the kind of doomsday scenario of AI becoming sentient and
Right.
taking over and killing us and things like that, or making humanity obsolete.
Yeah.
I fundamentally just don't believe in those claims. Not because I'm kind of ideologically against it. It's just that there's zero evidence that any of
Mm.
that stuff is going to happen, right? Like I think we need to kind of base our fears on evidence, and uh, there's zero evidence that AI becoming better at predicting the next word or writing sentences or analyzing data has any kind of equivalence to sentience, right? Like that
Yeah.
line is something that people draw, but there's just no evidence for it.
Yeah, it's funny because right before we had this interview, I thought about canceling the interview actually because I asked ChatGPT 4.5 what Saman Farid would say if I interviewed him, and it predicted exactly that. That's exactly
There we
what it
go.
said.
Oh,
So
that'll
I
save
thought,
me some time next time.
what do we even need? What are we even doing here? But no, that's an interesting point. And talking about fads and AI and what is a trend and what is a fad and what is a future. First of all, I have a GIF of a monkey for $100,000. Would you like to buy it from me? It's called an NFT. But no, I'm just kidding. But people wonder whether AI is a fad or a future or automation. All of these things, are they here to stay, or is this just the topic du jour? There was an article that came out recently where somebody was saying that the greatest result of these types of advancements is a collective waste of our time, that bots are going to be writing all of the content, bots are going to be responding to all of the content. And then for us as humans, our future job is just going to be to filter through 90% of garbage out there. And that in the end, it's going to be largely a waste of time. I'm guessing that you probably don't wholly agree with that, but I'm curious where you stand, especially in an
Yeah,
election year, not to dive into that, but social media, misinformation, all of these topics, very interesting at the moment.
yeah. I think it's a great question. I mean, I share a lot of those fears, right? I think it would be naive, or to say that people are not going to use these things for negative or nefarious
Yeah.
purposes. Um, but I think that the good guys will prevail, right? I think that
Mm.
there's uh, the like a lot of these theories that you're describing, they kind of assume that one side has these tools and everybody else is sitting on their hands, kind of wondering what's going to happen. Like that's not true, right? Like the other side has tools too, right? Like
Mm.
everybody who creates a spam bot, there's 10 people on the other side who will use AI to create some kind of discrimination engine that will weed out all the tools that they don't want to see, right?
Mm.
All the tweets or blog posts or whatever that they don't want to
Yeah.
see. Anybody who uses AI to kind of do nefarious things on the road, there's going to be people on the other side that are going to make better tools that counteract that. So yeah, I mean, I think like every technological tool in the past, there have been nefarious uses of it, but I think humanity is still here. Humanity is thriving, and on the net, humanity is
Right. We're doing
using
okay.
using those things in a positive way.
Mm.
And I don't think the answer is necessarily regulation, although I think regulation has a part to play.
Mm.
But I think the answer is like, let's turbocharge the good guys, right?
Mm.
that's the way that we make sure these technologies are used in a positive way that's beneficial for humanity.
Makes sense. So let's talk about the switch to robotics then. So you started Formic in 2020, relatively recently, a pandemic company, I guess you could say, which is an interesting time to be launching any business, I'm sure, let alone in the physical space. What led you to ultimately decide that this was the path for you with your knowledge? Why this company? Why this sector? In some sense, it seems like, robotic automation is nothing particularly new, but you found something new here. What made you jump in knowing what you know and with your huge background?
Yeah, I've worked with lots of robotics companies. I invested in a lot of robotics companies. I have seen the trajectory over and over again. And I think while there's a lot of incredible technology that's making robots more capable, the thing that made me want to start Formic is I realized that the linchpin for kind of real world adoption of robotics was something else. The thing that was preventing mass adoption is not that robots can't complete tasks well. Today, there's robots that can do almost anything for you, right? If you spend enough money and set aside enough time and kind of define the conditions well enough, you can get a robot to change your tire. You can get a robot to paint your house. You can get a robot to um, fold your laundry. Like all of these things are theoretically all possible today. The thing that's preventing adoption is not the intelligence of the robot per se, it's the complexity and risk associated with doing it. And it sounds like a nuanced difference, but the for most of the users of robots in the world right now, it's just completely inaccessible, right? Like
Mm.
you could say, I want a robot that will do this thing for me, but I don't know how to get there. I don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to cough up, and there's so much risk associated with it. Once I have that robot, like what if it breaks down? And now I've spent a few $100,000 and it's not working for me. So
Yeah.
um, we started Formic really with the idea of democratizing access to automation.
Mm.
And I think that there are examples of this in other contexts, but one of the ones that comes to mind is AWS, right? Where if the only way for Ross, for you and I to record this podcast would be that we had a server rack in our house
Yeah, right here,
with
humming away.
a million air conditioners pointed at
Yes.
it, and fiber optic lines hooked up directly
Yep.
between you and I.
Yep.
Like it just wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
The only way that these kinds of things are done is if the infrastructure is in place that makes it easy enough for us. And I think the same applies to robotics. Is that the if each factory owner or each construction site manager or each uh, you know shopkeeper had to figure out a way to get robots working for their facility, uh, like it's just completely inaccessible.
Mm.
And so what Formic figured out is that we can build a bunch of technology tools and software tools that makes it much easier to deploy and adopt automation. But more importantly, we can also take on a lot of the responsibility that would historically have gone on the end customer. And so we take on end-to-end deployment responsibility for performance of those systems. We commit to, for example, you need 5 boxes per minute placed over here. We will place 5 boxes per minute. And if we don't, we're in violation of our contract. Right? So these are all things that we can start to put in place that really drive up adoption. And we've seen, the results have spoken. We have hundreds of robots deployed now, all of which the factories have told us, I've been wanting to automate for the last 10 years, but I've never had a viable path to doing it. And
Mm.
so it's very, very fulfilling for us to see the impact that these robots are having for our customers.
That's awesome. So let's imagine that I'm a factory worker and I make bottles of water, and I put right on the bottle of water that each cap is individually hand screwed onto the bottle. Um, and I enjoy, whoosh, whipping my workers as they get arthritis in their hands. How would you convince me to switch and to put those people to use elsewhere?
Um, the main thing is when we talk to these factories, they don't need a lot of convincing. Right? I think that these factories are generally, acutely aware of the problem, right? This 20 to 30% per month headcount turnover
Right.
is by itself, a
Right.
massive issue. And so every month, often multiple times a week, they'll start the shift and they'll say, "Oh, look, so and so didn't show up. Looks like we have to figure out a way to run without him." Right, and so they'll kind of cut off other non-critical tasks and send people here. And that's really, really a difficult position to be in if you're trying to run a 24/7 production facility. And so we show up and we say, look, we can help fill a few of your empty headcount for you. It reduces your need to have this turnover. Let's figure out some of the positions that you're currently have the highest turnover in, because those are clearly the hardest and most difficult jobs.
Yeah.
And then they can reallocate the labor to other tasks. So it's generally very straightforward for a lot of these manufacturers.
Mm. So have they been able to dramatically switch? Has any of your success stories gone from 2,000 some hours to a massive increase in uptime after making this switch?
Yeah, many of them have gone, from one shift a day to two shifts a day, or even three shifts a day. Which roughly it's 2,000 hours, 4,000 hours, 6,000 hours. 6,000 hours is three shifts a day for 200 days a year, which is pretty common. So in that context, if they if they go from one shift a day to two shifts a day, basically they can take some of the labor and run a second shift. They now are producing double the output of that factory.
Yeah.
But more importantly, the bottom line of these factories goes up about 10 or 20x, because all, like we were saying earlier, all the fixed costs are already paid for in that first shift, right? You've already paid for the facility and the forklift and the air conditioners and all that stuff. Now you're doubling the production of that facility. So it has a massive, massive impact on the viability and productivity of these factories.
That's fantastic. So you've obviously garnered a number of awards. Do these awards mean much to you? Is it a validation of sorts? Do you care at all when somebody honors you like Fast Company?
Of course, it's always satisfying to, I think the curse of every entrepreneur, on the one hand, like you said, I think it's common to be overly optimistic and feel like everything is easier than you would expect. But the flip side is also true, which is super self-critical, right? And I think it's very, very common to say, oh, is this all in vain? We're failing, nothing's working. Here are all the problems.
Yeah.
And I think the curse of every entrepreneur is that you always see the problems, because that's what drives you to do something about it. And so, getting recognition is sometimes a chance to step away from that for a second and say, okay, yes, here are all the other 10 things that we're not doing perfectly, but we did accomplish something, and that's something to be proud of. So, obviously we don't depend on them for motivation, but it's a nice reprieve from the kind of inner dialogue.
Speaking of inner dialogue, I always am fascinated about this. Are you the type of person that you hit your pillow and you're fast asleep every night and you sleep like a baby for 8 hours, or does that inner dialogue continue all night, every night?
I have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old.
Congratulations!
At
Oh
home.
my God,
So,
no! You have a 2-year-old. And, oh Lord!
Yeah, so sleep is not really on the menu.
No, oh man, I have a 5-year-old and a baby on the way, so I can imagine your pain.
Yeah, it's no, I truthfully I don't sleep that much.
Obviously,
and it's not primarily because of the kids. And I think I blame them, but really I'm often just up at night thinking about things.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think that there isn't much that I'm actually envious of anybody in this world, but that is definitely one. I have a best friend, and he's like, as soon as I hit the pillow, I'm out for as many hours as I have. He's just down, and I think, what a gift that would be. Because, even like I'm right about to fall asleep, and like right as I do it, it's like, hey, your dad had cancer when you were 17 years old. That was 20 years ago. How old are you? How old was he then? How many years do you have? Like, it's like, fucking brain, shut up, man. Like, stop it. Like, I don't need to hear this at midnight. Like, right about to fall asleep. And you think, like, if this contract fails, then something, I would give anything for that superpower. And I'm like you. I use, like, my kid is just a justification. I can blame it on her. I can say, oh, it's her fault. But it would have happened anyways.
Yeah, yeah. I think
unfortunately.
sometimes the brain plays tricks on you. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, there are things that help. Exercise helps, and
right.
uh, yeah, I think that's the only thing.
It's the only thing. Yeah, exactly. You got to get those steps, the 10,000 steps or whatever they say.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so for people who, these are all very sexy topics, robotics, AI, machine learning, very trendy, of course. And for people who have an interest, but who haven't yet built a career out of it, as you did when you were a child, what are some of the steps that you took to build a career and to get started? And how would you advise somebody get started in this day and age if they don't know where to begin?
I think it depends a lot on what you're trying to accomplish, right?
Mm,
But I think AI is playing such a huge part in the way we're going to live our lives in the
mm,
next 20, 30 years that I think it's really important for every young person to be very, very familiar with what it's capable of and
mm,
how it's changing and how it's evolving. Um, I think while there is a lot of hype surrounding it, it's important to remember that we're still in the very, very early innings
yeah.
of AI, both the technology around AI being built
Yeah.
and the applications of AI being kind of put to use. And I think that there's um, like millions of things that you can do with it that
Mm,
currently nobody's even scratching the surface for. So um, one thing that I told my young nephew recently, is 18, is there's very few things in the world that you can really quickly become a world expert in.
yes.
And AI is
Yes.
one of those things because
Yes.
the whole field has been in existence for a few
Yes.
years only, right? Like especially kind of around deep learning, large
Mm,
language models, the applications of all large language models, all less than a couple of years old. And so the most experienced person in the world on this topic has 1 year of experience, right? And so, if you're hungry and aggressive and willing to learn, I think there's a lot to be done to kind of use these technologies in really interesting ways. So, um, I think kind of this current generation has a lot of opportunity ahead of it
mm,
to build incredibly interesting things, um, and at the same time, I think the kind of plurality and diversity of the world is increasing a lot, and so
absolutely.
our communities, our societies, the way that we live our lives as individuals, as families, like it's all changing,
Yep.
and I think young people more than most have an optimism and a willingness, and a kind of real sense of justice, and want to use these technologies and tools for the betterment of humanity.
Mm,
And I think that passion, that desire is so well placed with young people. Right? As we get older, we become skeptical. We become fixed in
yeah.
our ways. We become
The pressures
creatures of
of reality
habit.
sink in,
Yeah, or
all of
or
that.
or even worse, we look back and think the past was better somehow, right? And so
Yep.
we're like, oh
Yep.
yeah, I wish I could go back to what the world was like 20 years ago. And like
Yep.
I don't think that's a kind of very healthy outlook. So, I think the
Yeah.
it's so great to see young people have this optimism and this sense of like excitement about changing the world for the better. And I think that the more tools they have, the better the future will be.
No kidding. And I personally wish that Pogs and Tamagotchis were still popular. That's the world I'm living in, but stuck with AI, unfortunately. Stuck with iPhones and AI and cameras.
For
No, that's a
us.
great way to put it. And I was actually coincidentally enough thinking about that last night at 3 in the morning. I was thinking about how these trends come and go, and what you described is literally a thought that I had about how you can sort of sense these trends by when you can all develop a skill at the same time. And there are certain waves of that. Like take Bill Gates, working with computers, tinkering in his high school lab. He was the foremost expert in computers at that time by simply trying to code something on a computer in a time when very few people were even attempting to do that. So you got a kid who ends up becoming, the pioneer founder of Microsoft, right? As these trends come and go, and all the ones you've described, there is at that moment right at the beginning of a wave where somebody has the ability to not necessarily be an expert, but to be an expert relative to the rest of the world. And therefore, their personal growth and knowledge can mimic the trend as it happens. And this is true. I'm a huge fan of dance music, for example. And electronic music was sort of, 20 years ago, sort of the same kind of thing, or 30 years ago. There were a few people who weren't very good as producers by today's standards, but at that time they were the best of who was around. And then they all grew together and they became the legends of that space. So I think it's a very interesting thought that one might always want to seek out opportunities where they have the position where they could be that expert or on par with somebody else and grow together into an industry versus seeking out a zone where it's well entrenched and everybody's already established themselves and it'd be very hard to grow along with something. Do you think that's just generally good life advice?
Um, I think that the rate of change is always increasing.
Yeah.
And I think there's, you look at all of these curves of the kind of history of humanity, and then kind of suddenly, they look kind of exponential and they go vertical for one reason or another. And I think humanity is as a collective, reaching new heights, and new levels of maturity and new levels of societal organization and new levels of awareness. And I think all of those things mean that for the individual young person, right, like the number of opportunities is always increasing. And so while, in the time of Bill Gates, there was, maybe one technological revolution or two, maybe a few other things in parallel that he could have been a part of. I think today there are hundreds of technological revolutions happening at the same time. And if you fast forward, 50 years, there's probably going to be 1,000, right? Like, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
each of these fields will produce not just great companies, but individuals with a lot of expertise, really, really hopefully beneficial, benefits for society. And so I think in general, like human civilization is marching forward, and the number of interconnected dots is increasing really quickly. Like another thing that I think about often, 3 in the morning thoughts is the collective like knowledge of human civilization so far is really being advanced by probably there's, let's say, 500 universities in the world, and 5,000 people at each of those universities. Like that's the group of people that is on behalf of all of civilization breaking frontiers in new science, and literature and poetry and all these different things. I mean, obviously the rest of society is doing a lot of incredible work as well, but when it comes to like the boundaries of physics or the boundaries of computer science, right? Like there's this kind of actually like a very small set of people that is advancing human civilization. And uh, the thing that I get excited about thinking about is, what happens when we have, let's say not all 7 billion humans, but let's say half of them, 3 billion humans, right? Applying their capability and knowledge and kind of creativity to advancing the state of human knowledge. And so I think that like we haven't even tapped 1% of 1% of the potential of the human kind of collective human mind and spirit and kind of innovation. And so like there's so much ahead.
Well, that's a fascinating and refreshing perspective, and I think much needed in these what some would call scary times, or exciting times. Again, I guess it's choose how glass half full, glass half empty kind of thing. So for you personally, with Formic, for the next 5 years, what would outrageous success be, and what are you hoping to get? And on a broader scale, 10 years, what would you hope from the line of work in general? What would you like to see?
Yeah, I think for Formic, success looks like every factory being able to run 8,000 hours a year. Right.
Okay.
So being able to kind of instantly snap your fingers and have unlimited workforce available for every factory in America. And soon afterwards, other fields outside of manufacturing as well. So for us to be able to get there, we need to make robots a lot cheaper. We need to make them a lot easier to deploy. We need to make them a lot more flexible to do like many different tasks. And we need to build all the infrastructure to support those robots once they're in all of those places. So that requires we're just kind of chipping away at what's a very, very big problem. Um, but I think that the impact would be that we would be able to massively unlock the potential of production, and as a result, unlock the kind of abundance for humanity, right? Like I would want you to be able to go to a grocery.
Yeah.
Like I think whenever I see the inflation numbers go up, I feel like, okay, like this is something we have to do something about this, right? And I think
Yeah.
the biggest counter-inflationary force is technology, right? If we can make the cost of goods cheaper by making them more efficient to produce, that will immediately impact the price of cereal in a grocery store, and that's the way that we counter inflation. And I think monetary policy and things like that are not anything I can do anything about, but when it comes to making products easier and cheaper to produce, like I can do something about that. And so that's our focus right now.
That's awesome. Well, I think there's a lot of people who would love to see it, myself included. Last little bit of wild speculation before we jump off here. UBI, is that something that you see happening? Is that something that you see will be necessary or good, or is that just something that people are wrong about?
Um, I have some opinions, but
Yeah.
the thing that I'll say is that I don't think my opinion on this topic should matter.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is, I think that there's a lot of people in the technology industry who, like, once they've built some kind of technology, feel like they can kind of dictate how the world should function. And like, there are people who
Right.
are much more knowledgeable at me around things around kind of macroeconomics, sociology, how societies should function, systems of governance. Like, frankly, I haven't studied those things. I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about them, and I think that I would have a lot of work to do before I would have an informed opinion on that
Mm.
topic. And I think it's something as technologists we need to kind of reflect on and recognize is that just because I know how to make robots work, it doesn't mean I know how to dictate social policy.
Mm.
And just because somebody knows how to make AI, work, it doesn't mean that they know how to dictate social policy. And I think like it's a you or even things like education, right? Like anyway, I think that there's a lot of things around how society should function that are really really important questions that deserve a lot of thought. And I don't know if my experience translates. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I have my instinct about whether UBI is good or not. But again, like
Okay. Well,
I
how about this? Will it happen or not? Just guess. 50-50. Is that something that we're going to head towards or no? Wild guess.
I think there's like from what I've read, there's a lot of research that shows that strong social safety nets are
Mm.
good for people
Yeah.
and are good for societies and civilizations. And I think that there shouldn't like I don't think that there should be people starving on the street or um, like unable to pay their medical bills or
Yeah.
unable to pay for their children's education. I think as a society we can do better than that.
Yeah.
Um, that's my baseline. How exactly we get there and how we build that social safety net, I don't exactly know like what the best
Mm.
mechanisms are. But UBI
Fair
might
enough.
might be one of the answers.
Fair enough. And we both live in locations where we are confronted with that on a daily basis. Me in the LA area, you up in the Bay Area, where you can see the extremes in terms of poverty and in terms of lack of access to these important things. But I won't press you on it. I was just curious. I'm not, this is
No,
not,
I mean, yeah, I mean, I
I'm
just think
going back to the board. He gave
yeah, no, I think I think
um,
any sane person would look at that situation and feel like something's not right, right?
right.
Like again, like I don't know what the method is
It's hard.
to
Yeah.
help
It's
those
not, these are
people,
not
right?
easy problems. Yeah.
Yeah, but like we all know that there's something wrong here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, as we wrap things up here, again, you've been very generous with your time. I can't thank you enough. What is a piece of parting wisdom, or is there something, this is the old Peter Thiel chestnut, but is there something that you believe very strongly that the rest of the world generally doesn't believe? Is there a piece of advice that goes against the mainstream grain?
There's probably a lot of things in that bucket, but I think the one that maybe is most relevant in the context is I've learned the hard way to uh, like don't really take people's advice. I think
All right, I'm out of here. See you later.
what I've learned is that there's a lot of people who will give you advice
Mm.
as if they know the answer. And I think when you're young or kind of in the beginning of your career, it's like easy to be like, oh, like so and so's so knowledgeable, or they've seen success, or they've done this and that, and like they probably can be helpful to me. And it's I realized over and over and over again that probably 99% of the advice that I got was wrong. And when I talk to others, I think people have a very similar sentiment. So if I had one controversial piece of opinion, it's just like, you can ask for people's advice to hear what they think, but don't take their advice.
Love it. Brilliant. Advising, I mean, that's a paradox in and of itself. I think Schrodinger's cat just exploded somewhere. Say, here's one piece of advice, don't take advice. No, that's fantastic. And I share your vision. I hope that all of the people twisting bottle caps and lifting heavy bricks and breaking their back on a daily basis, may that too be relegated to the past at some point in a human future. It would be amazing if we as people no longer had to do that. And if people could, use all of their brain. So I think it's a very noble pursuit. And again, you have really contributed a lot to these fields, and you're still contributing, and you're really at the forefront of this, at least in my eyes. So it's very valuable to get your perspective on this stuff. So again, thank you so much, Saman. It's been an absolute pleasure. And they can find out the website. It's Formic, FORMIC.co, right?
That's
They
right.
can check you out there. Any other place where they might be able to follow along, or anything you want to promote?
Yeah, I think our website, you can check out our GoFormic Twitter, or X. But yeah, if you know any factories that are struggling to hire labor, give us a call.
All right, fantastic.
But thank you so much, Ross, for having us. Really, really enjoyed the conversation. This was a lot of fun.
It was absolutely my pleasure. And with that, the podcast is over.